Good evening, everybody. I think it's evening wherever you are. It's evening when this video is coming out, that's for sure. It is 6 p.m. Central, and it is November 17th, 2025. Thank you for joining us for the first segment of this week, in which we will have three. And in all three episodes, I will be joined by the wonderful Flabbergasted and Sofia Spina. To start this week, we are going straight over to U.S. Army Garrison, Rhineland-Pfalz-Kaiserslautern, where the U.S. Army is bumping heads with Catholic chaplains, which is interesting. So the Army has made changes to its funding of the Chaplain Corps extracurricular activities across its department, and Catholics in particular are in an uproar over the move. The chaplains at the base that I just named have complained to Congress that they lack the manpower to provide support in the form of religious education, administration, other extracurricular activities, and they deem these activities necessary to maintain freedom of religion in their Catholic community. Interesting. The Army cites that the chaplaincy is actually double dipping into two different funding sources, and that creates a redundancy, which is, just a lack of a better term, a waste of money. And it is not just Catholics or even Christians that these policies are targeting, per se. This is affecting every religious or every religion and denomination. So what is making the Catholics cry foul? Probably just the fact that they're being treated like everybody else. We know that they don't typically like that. Military members, religious or not, should always be prepared to make sacrifices, face hardship. After all, isn't that what Catholicism is founded on? This article is in Stars and Stripes and was written by Lara Corte on November 5th, 2025. Flabbergasted, gotta start with you. You're a veteran. We just had Veterans Day last week. I hope you had a nice day. And did you go and get free pancakes or anything like that? There are a lot of... You did?
It's nice. It's the only time of year I will like without being prompted, tell people that I'm a veteran. So that way I don't have to deal with all of that, fake expression of support that people like to give. Thank you for your service.
Yeah.
We'll do it for pancakes.
Yeah,
I'll do it for the pancakes.
I feel you. I took advantage, sort of. I took my son to a train museum, and we got him for free. So it was fine. We had a lot of fun, but nonetheless, I have to start with you. You know, veteran, were you in the Army?
Yes, it was.
Oh, okay, great. Well, how's this article strike you? What comes to mind when you see that Catholic chaplains are at odds with our new Army policies?
I think one thing that you said really stuck out, right? The Catholics are upset that they're being treated like everyone else, right? Yeah. They want religious freedom and their access to religious freedom, but they want to be more free than all the other religions, clearly. Because, I mean, first off, I have so many problems with chaplains, the chaplain program in the Army, in the military in the first place. I understand that there is a need to provide access to religious services, but that doesn't mean the government needs to fund them. And that's exactly what we're doing here. And the Catholic Church, the most wealthy organization, easily the most wealthy religious organization on the planet, is taking military funding to propagate their religion within the military. And now when they don't get as much of that funding, they're mad because now they can't afford to fund these things, like the richest organization in the world, like throw in a couple bucks, dude.
Yeah. And it's funny because it's not the liturgical portions of their service, right? It's like music classes, education. In fact, there was a line in the article that was written by this Lara Corte, in which the Catholics were saying, or the chaplains, I should say, were saying that they were using some of that funding to keep track of sacramental records, people that were coming in. Isn't that a little bit of overreach? And do you really need to use government or Americans' tax dollars to do that kind of thing? So Sofia, it's not like the stuff that Catholics require for religious freedom. It's like extra stuff. What's your take?
Well, I fully agree when I think about the wealth of the Catholic Church and the idea that, oh, no, the article focused again and again on how overworked now these folks were because their pastoral duties were, they were untenable. I'm like, you could fix that. Like, isn't that a thing you guys could do pretty easily? I thought that was interesting. I loved the explanation in the article when the article mentions that Catholics are somehow uniquely affected by this because they have they require specialized support because their liturgy is so specific and they do things in such a specific way. And my thought was, well, okay, but if you were part of like a mega church back home, does the army need to be, or military need to be providing mega church like experiences? Are pyrotechnics required on stage if you're Baptist and you're of, like what level do we say is an appropriate level of support? And I don't really think it should be determined by how fancy your services are. That seems like it's kind of a separate thing. I think for me, this also made me think about, I'm not in the military, I haven't been, but having spoken to veterans and then worked with quite a few people who work in mental health at the VA, they point out that mental health services are so strapped that they get so little. And there are some veterans who've waited a long time for support that they desperately need. And so when I think about money being given to the church, like I'm sure that is important for some folks in the military who need that support. I'm also very sure suicide prevention is really important, and I know that doesn't receive enough either. So if we're thinking about where money is going in the military to support people emotionally, I would have a hard time thinking it needs to go to the fanciest mass possible.
Yeah, Go ahead, Flabbergasted.
That actually hits on something that I think is really important on this, right? When we're talking about what chaplains do in the military is spending money on chaplains instead of mental health services because they use the chaplains as effectively a
mental health outlet.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. An ad hoc mental health outlet. Oh, you need counseling? Oh, you're struggling? Here, go talk to the chaplain. Not a mental health counselor, not a medical professional. Go talk to the chaplain and have your spiritual needs addressed while we ignore your real ones.
Yeah, so that's interesting. That was what I was thinking. And you guys are starting a great conversation right now because, one of the critiques I have about the Chaplain Corps is it might be unconstitutional. It is a government endorsement. It is government funded religion. The way they get away with that now, anyway, is by saying, "Hey, we'll make religious services to all religions available." And so up until about 20 years ago, we only had Jewish and Christian chaplains, right? It's no surprise to me that in this country it was Judeo-Christian related services. Recently, they've added the Muslim and the Buddhist faiths, and there's no atheist chaplain, there's no Hindu chaplain, right? There's not a chaplain. Like if you are either a Catholic or a Protestant, you go to the same chaplain, and the bases have different services available, but essentially you're still kind of pigeonholed to a certain chaplain. So it's not like it's completely comprehensive. And so I have a little bit of an issue with that, but also, why are we leveraging religious leaders as mental health counselors? It actually leads to more mental health problems, because if you think about, and you guys are well-versed doing what we do, all of the mental health problems that are entwined in religion, would it be beneficial for a member of the LGBTQ community to be referred immediately to a chaplain, right? Would it be beneficial for somebody who was, I don't know, sexually assaulted in their life by somebody they looked up to a religious
Catholic priest?
So anyway, I think that there are very many ambiguities there. However, I think this person who wrote this article did a pretty good job of approaching it from a non-biased standpoint. I didn't feel like the author thought one way or the other. I want to get your take, Flabbergasted. Why can't people just go off base? Why do they need to be on base? What do you think about that?
I think when we're in the US, there is no reason they shouldn't be able to go off base. I can understand to a certain degree, like making sure you have and provide to the best of your ability for the type of work that we do in the military, that you have some sort of support for religious people when they're in combat zones, when they're not at their home bases, when they're not at somewhere where they can go off base and just like intermingle with society in a normalish fashion. But yeah, in the bases in the US, if you need to go to church, go off base. You don't need a church on base. There's churches off base. They're everywhere. They're everywhere. Catholic churches. And especially since like all these other religions, as you mentioned earlier, aren't getting any of this support. Like, why do the Christians get a church on base? They have all these services. But where's the Jain service? Where's the Shinto service for the one or two Shinto followers in the U.S. military? They don't have them because it's not about access, equal access to religious freedom. It's about privileged access to religious freedom. Yeah. To reinforce and yeah.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Sofia.
Just that when I think about part of the justification that is used to support folks in their religion if they're far away is that they need that mental emotional support, right? How much more would you need that if you were a Jain and you were the only person, and a Jain in the military is already kind of an interesting concept, but you know, if you were a Hindu and you were the only person around who was a Hindu, like when I think about it that way, I almost feel like we should be prioritizing folks who are of these minority faiths simply because they're the most likely to be struggling without that community.
And that is a great opening for a more extensive conversation on some of the things that we've seen in our country specifically, and in the more conservative states where they come out with these rules like, hey, you must have the 10 Commandments in your classroom, or we're going to start studying the Bible. Okay, great. I've got this Hindu child that gets picked on enough as it is. Now they don't even know these stories. They're not familiar with them. And then they're being forced against their will to kind of, coalesce with everybody around them. And it's not only incredibly offensive, but it's dangerous for them. We other people by doing that. So it's actually a benefit to keep religion, away from the government so that we can kind of ensure religious freedom, if you will, in that way, in that regard. Right. And so, yeah, I think that it's really funny that we can take the Catholics' argument and kind of throw it against them and say, hey, you were looking for religious freedom. Sofia, I want to go back to you. So being somebody that works in mental health counseling and somebody that's worked with veterans in mental health counseling, what is your perception of, when I say Catholics are upset that they're getting treated like everybody else? Did you find, that there was like one religion that was treated differently, or there was one religion that you've come across that maybe expected more, or was it just the Catholics, or how did that change?
Yeah, it's interesting because I think the folks that I tended to see, or that I'm familiar with, it almost feels like the thing that matters is getting help more than anything else. And so I went to, I actually got my therapeutic training at a religious institution with a bunch of other people who were veterans. So it was a very specific kind of interesting place to be. But something that no matter what their background was, because they were being trained as mental health professionals and not as preachers or pastors, was to put that aside to the point where the service member coming in wouldn't necessarily even know what your religious affiliation was. We explicitly talked about the idea because, again, these are mental health professionals, not pastors, even though it was a religious institution. They would talk about the idea that somebody who's coming in because they, are trans and are struggling with that in the military, regardless of what your personal take is, you set that aside because that is not the problem they're coming in about. They're coming in about the feelings that they're going through, the struggles that they're having. If they don't have an issue with the fact that they are trans, and they're not coming in and saying that, even if they do, then the issue is that they're struggling with it, not that they are trans. And so even at this Christian institution, they were saying that because they're mental health professionals, right? So it's interesting because when I think about the actual specific religious folks I knew, and admittedly, like this was not maybe the larger body of religious folks, what I was seeing was just responding to a need. But we're not pastors, so we have a different level of ethics. We have different things we can and cannot say. And we also are accountable to each other and keeping each other ethical as we serve the community that we're serving. So yeah, that's kind of a roundabout answer to that, I realize.
No, I think that was good. And I think my question could have been a little bit more pointed, but it's such a, there's so many avenues that you can go with this when you're dealing with mental health. And then you've got so many different denominations. I think you hit the nail on the head. It's not the issue itself, it's the struggle. And I think that turning to a religious clergy member for help with that, it's not going to help the struggle. Flabbergasted, you were trying to chime in, so please take it away.
Yeah. I think it's also the fact that we're talking about mental health, and we're talking about the way mental health professionals deal with mental health problems. And we need to remember, these chaplains are not mental health professionals. And that's exactly the problem. They are not sitting there saying mental health first, religion second. Right, which is what Sofia is saying that was going on in that religious institution that she was working in. They were religious, but they were also mental health professionals, and mental health came first. Mm-hmm. That is not what's happening. Not usually what happens with chaplains and with religious counseling. And so all these people, and on top of that, we're talking about all of these people who have different religious needs. And sometimes you'll have chaplains who will dabble and learn a little bit of all these different religions so they can help and do all this for people who have different religious faiths to a very minimal, generally very ignorant degree of it. But it also neglects all the people who need help, who aren't religious, who are seeking assistance and don't want that spiritual connection. They don't want this woo to be thrown into their mental health problem, which is exactly what happens when you go and talk to a chaplain.
So one thing on that. So I think it's interesting that the topic is on chaplains being upset to have funding cut. And the conversation kind of goes into, they think they're mental health counselors, like they should have, and obviously we're like, they should have their funding cut because they're being used incorrectly. Sofia, go ahead, please. You were going to say something.
No, I mean, it's funny because I immediately think of Father Mulcahy and MASH, and who doesn't love him, right? But there was a fully separate character who was the mental health professional in MASH, wasn't the chaplain. And you can see the difference even in this TV show. And I know that you guys have a lot more military experience than me, given my TV show reference. But even there, where they're all presented so incredibly sympathetically, it's not the same thing. And it's going to cause harm.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to pivot a little bit because there's something I want to make sure we touch upon. The Army cut the funding because the churches were double dipping and they weren't saying anything to anybody, right? They were like, oh, cool, 2 different revenue streams. Well, we'll just take the extra funding. They didn't say, hey, there's a redundancy here. No, they didn't come clean about that. They just took the extra dough. And the Army is like, wait a minute. That money needs to be used elsewhere. Maybe it can be going to mental health counseling. Maybe it could be going anywhere. Maybe there are schools on base. There are hospitals on base. There are maternity wards on base. And the Catholics are mad because they can't do music class. You have got to be kidding me. You have music class. And they're not kidding. That's the crazy part. Go ahead.
Music class. Sorry. I was going to say music class isn't part of their religious service, right? Like they're using funds for this religious thing, and they're using it for non-religious things just so they can keep the funds.
Yeah. That's right. That's right. Sofia.
Yep. I mean, it's a goldfish that will expand to the level of space that it has. You give a religious institution, or any institution really, but in this case, religious. Yeah. They're going to keep adding things and saying they need the money because now they have all these services, right? It makes, so kind of when you mentioned the idea of it being constitutional or unconstitutional, I thought about how the establishment clause, we always interpret that as meaning no specific religion, but I think there's a way maybe we can look at that and wonder, is having these religious institutions brought into military life a way of saying religion itself is good? And is that potentially not a violation of the Establishment Clause? Because it's establishing the concept of religion as an inherent good. And I think that's potentially something to raise our eyebrows at governmentally.
Yeah, that is a great question to raise. My opinion specifically about religion getting a vote to not be important to the military is probably that it's not going to happen. I don't think I don't think that we're going to see anybody say, you know what, we should cut religion. And let me tell you something. So I do want to, it's easy to poo-poo on religion because we're probably more studied in it than the actual practitioners. And so we kind of know what we're talking about, right? But there is some props I want to give them. So I was at a course one time and we had a chaplain come in and they were like, here's what we do, and here's how we help. And I stood up and I raised my hand and I said, so what services would you provide to an atheist who, needed some kind of secular service or had a mental need, a mental health need, but they didn't want religion. And he said, I get it. You don't want to get intertwined with religion, but we don't want anything to happen to you. So come to us anyway, and we will find the help. I really respected that. The thing is, though, how many people really feel comfortable taking that leap and saying, I'm vulnerable, now I'll go to the clergy member? That's a tough call for somebody. So, we have to really kind of take a look at this and say, we don't need to put all of our focus on Catholic mental health or Christian or just standard household religious mental health. We do need to expand. Maybe the way that we're doing it is not correct. It's a really interesting conversation.
And moreover, on that note, sorry.
No, please.
The chaplain, right, says that in public, but that may not be how he acts in private. And on top of that, that's not what all chaplains are going to say. So this one specific chaplain who seems to have a good approach that we have no reason to apply to the system as a whole. And before we move on, I do also want to address the question about constitutionality. I, as some of you might know, I was a history teacher, and I taught this stuff. And basically what it boils down to is that the military giving funds to religions at all is preferencing or giving preference to religion over irreligion, which is the problem. So that's where the issue comes with the chaplain program at all, and why I don't think it should even exist, except for making sure that you're providing something religious in places where people wouldn't otherwise have it, to make sure that you're providing the needs for your soldiers. That's something I think there's a nuanced conversation to have there. But that's kind of the constitutionality of it in my understanding of it.
Yeah, I think that's a great explanation. I've never heard it explained, religion versus irreligion. And I think that opens up, maybe a new lens for people who want to understand the Chaplain Corps in terms of the First Amendment. I do agree, and as the article cited, the Catholics in this situation are saying, look, it's a German-speaking country. People don't come here and automatically know German, read the street signs, go to the church, and then understand what they're even saying. I get it. And, in that aspect, I don't mind, especially if you're going to provide all outlets to all people for all different religions. Fine. Use one stream of funding to do the liturgical services. But, there's still that question that needs to be hashed out, constitutionality. Sofia, I'm going to let you take this away. What are your thoughts as we close out?
Well, one of my thoughts is that is this a surprise military base that the Catholic Church didn't know was there, and there would be English speakers they would need to provide for?
Wow.
It is a German-speaking country, but, wow. I feel like they could have anticipated this, because I even look at American history. I'm like, when you had a German-speaking New York, you had German-speaking pastors there to serve that community. So I don't know. It kind of feels like they're treating themselves like they're some tiny little upstart Appalachian, Baptist church or something, when that is not who we're talking about. We're talking about a pretty deeply corrupt global institution that we're paying as American taxpayers just because they say they're providing a service, which, well, we already have other ways to provide that are underfunded.
Excellent. Excellent. Yeah. And, there's an economic factor here, folks. No matter how you slice it, there's money involved. They want the money. And that's why we're having this conversation. And I you know what? Something just came to mind, like, hey, when we go to this country, we don't speak their language, therefore, and then insert argument. What happens, though, when you get really conservative people and they view others who come to their country, our country, and they don't speak our language. What do they say? What is the normal Catholic response you can expect for an immigrant who doesn't speak English? And maybe you should take a page out of your own book and take your own advice. In any case, folks, Flabbergasted, you had something?
Oh, no, I was just saying, yep. If the Catholic Church really cared that much, then they'd have English-speaking chaplains there. Or not chaplains, but English-speaking priests. But if the Catholic Church clearly doesn't care that much, they are only going to do it if the military pays for it?
Yeah. Well, fascinating conversation. I think we could probably go an hour on this, but I have good news for you guys, all you viewers who tuned in today. If you want to see more of us, just tune in on Wednesday. We have a whole other topic us three are going to be taking on, and make sure you keep watching The Nonprofits.